long time, the history of Ukrainian cinema, which is only 1 year younger than that of cinema itself, has been perceived in the West, and still mostly is, as a component of Soviet and, in some cases, even Russian cinema. Meanwhile, in the USSR, the official historiography placed Ukrainian cinema in a separate category narrowed down to ethnic definitions. Ideologically indoctrinated films on Ukrainian historical themes, screen adaptations of Ukrainian literary classics, and plots from village life were considered unconditionally Ukrainian Soviet films. On the contrary, the films depicting current life, genre cinema, could not be considered national in the USSR. They automatically became designated as all Soviet and were largely appropriated by Russian culture. Stalin's and later Soviet national policy in general ghettoized Ukrainian culture, defining a number of permitted topics centered mainly on traditional ethnographic culture. Going beyond these narrow limits was branded as bourgeois nationalism, and filmmakers branded as such were at best threatened with a ban from the profession, at worst oppressed or even executed. Ukrainians were allowed to shoot either folkloric Ukrainian or unified Soviet cinema, in which their life was no different from the life of Russians or other Russified nations. The Soviet system denied Ukrainians political agency and authentic self-representation and granted them only a metropolis-made colonially narrowed exotic make-up. However, the very nature of cinema opposed the narrowly ethnic traditionalist interpretation of culture. As one of the most important inventions of the modern era, cinematography was from the very beginning an international media of modernity and transgression. Therefore, Ukrainian cinema, even under the pressure of imperial ideologies and dogmas, constantly engaged into an inevitable conflict with its assigned role of maintaining the colonial status quo. After an almost 4-year-long struggle for independence, at the end of the 1920s, Ukraine was eventually occupied by the Bolsheviks, and the Moscow-backed puppet Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic was ultimately united with the newly formed USSR in 1922. In the spring of 1922, the government of Soviet Ukraine, whose humanitarian policy was determined by local autonomist elites linked with the Russian Bolsheviks, founded the All-Ukrainian Photo Cinema Administration, abbreviated in Ukrainian as VUFKU, which combined features of a government body and a vertically integrated film industry syndicate. In the light of the newly announced new economic policy, profitability of VUFKU was injured by film distribution, for which it received a monopoly throughout the whole territory of Ukraine. All film equipment and property in Ukraine were expropriated from the owners and nationalized. On the basis of film studios previously privately owned by Russian film producers, Soviet film factories were established in Odessa and Yalta. In the 1927, production in Yalta ceased due to a devastating earthquake, and the next year it was resumed at the brand-new giant film factory in Kyiv. Since the Ukrainian government at that time pursued a policy of Ukrainianization aimed at local population involvement in Bolshevik entities and the introduction of the Ukrainian language in all spheres of life, VUFKU, taking into account cinema's popularity, became the key institution for the implementation of emancipatory policies. During the VUFKU puberty period from 1922 to 1925, the modest production 3 to 5 films a year, including short films and documentaries, due to the lack of local Bolshevik loyal staff, was mostly carried out by representatives of the pre-revolutionary Russian film production, who did not flee after the revolution, as well as the actors of local Russian theaters. In spite of desperate efforts to emphasize revolutionary and sometimes even national topics, those early productions took advantage of the old-fashioned symbolist aesthetics, with its inherent gloomy mysticism and decadence, a trademark of Russian imperial pre-revolutionary cinema. In these heavily costumed, out-of-touch with reality dramas unfolding in the utopian countries of the speculative bourgeois West, mechanical combination of decadent poetics and symbolist aesthetics was complemented by bravura scenes in the spirit of frontal propaganda. The initial symbolist phase of independent Ukrainian cinema was seized by the first avant-garde invasion in 1924, when Les Kurbas, a Ukrainian modern theater theoretician, began his cinematic experiments at the VUFKU Odessa Film Factory. After three not-so-noteworthy short comedies mocking the old bourgeois lifestyle, he turned to the historically grounded short film The Arsenal Workers, depicting the Bolshevik uprising in Kyiv in 1918. The Arsenal Workers was not only the first Ukrainian film that addressed a modern plot, but also the first one evolving the avant-garde aesthetics. In particular, Kurbas experimented with the frame space, editing different scenes in parallel with a horizontally divided screen to reveal the semantics of the revolutionary struggle by visual means. Despite the fact that Kurbas' films have not survived, it is hard to overestimate his contribution to the development of Ukrainian cinema. He engaged the most outstanding actors of his experimental theater as well as fellow directors from his theater laboratories to work in film, which leveled it up professionally. In 1925, as a part of affirmative action policy, the VUFKU recruited Ukrainian writers, theater directors and actors to work in film en masse. They summoned new Ukrainian cultural elites loyal to the Bolsheviks were mostly representatives of the artistic avant-garde and combined ideas of national emancipation with radical principles of leftist revolutionary art. The same year, the best actors of the newly opened Odessa Ukrainian State Drama Theatre, led by Kurbas student Marko Tereshchenko, the inventor of the futuristic art of action theory, which prioritized collective plasticity, movement, and pantomime over the dictation of words, joined a group of Kurbasians at VUFKU Odessa Film Studio. Radically reforming the still quite chaotic screenwriting policy, VUFKU involved in film production the avant-garde writers who gathered around the leader of Ukrainian literature futurism, Mikhail Semenko, who in turn became the editor-in-chief of Odessa Film Factory. Ukrainian avant-garde writers were joined by local Odessa playwrights and set designers, mostly of Jewish origin. This Ukrainian Jewish political and artistic union in Ukrainian cinema would last throughout 1920s and 1930s and would bring the unique Ukrainian film school to prominence. Young 20-something-year-old futurist writers and avant-garde theater actors de facto established Ukrainian modernist cinema in just a few years. The Russian pre-revolutionary symbolist film tradition was ultimately discarded. Even former Russian directors such as Petro Chordinin, under the influence of the local experimental trend, mastered Ukrainian plots and developed new genres for Ukrainian cinema: detective action, revolutionary drama, and Ukrainian Eastern. The VUFKU inclusive policy enabled Ukrainian modernist and avant-garde artists, as well as European technicians, mostly cinematographers and set designers from Germany, to be involved in film production. Since VUFKU did not receive state subsidies but was a self-financed entity, it constantly balanced between the viewer's demand focused on light and entertaining genres and the Soviet state policy, which required the propaganda potential of cinema to be used in full to shape a society loyal to the Soviet regime. Trying to meet these contradictory requirements of the Bolshevik humanitarian policy on the one hand and the demands of the market on the other, VUFKU developed synthetic film genres such as revolutionary comedy, revolutionary epic, and historically revolutionary drama. Paying great attention to the emancipation of women and ethnic minorities in Ukraine, VUFKU created a series of films that promoted feminist agenda, as Vasilina, The Great Sorrow of a Little Woman, The Right for a Woman, Two Women About a Woman, including those depicting the liberation of women in the East, as Jalma and Tamila. To enrich Jewish cultural autonomy in Ukraine, a number of Jewish-themed films were released by VUFKU. It also produced the first Crimean Tatar literary classics film adaptation, Alim, in 1926, in the genre of adventure action. Despite the official ban on popular genres and the pressure of the avant-garde aesthetics, film directors Georgi Tasin and Georgi Stabovy beautifully crafted psychological dramas, Two Days in 1927 and The Night Coachman in 1929, both of which were styled as German Kammerspiel. At the same time, animation was developing in Ukraine. In 1927, the pioneer of Ukrainian animation, Vyacheslav Lewandowski, founded the Central Animation Workshop at the VUFKU Odessa Film Factory, where he showed the first Ukrainian cartoons, Ukrainization, and the Tale of the Straw Ball.